What if I told you that there's a single ingredient that can replace both eggs and oil in your favorite recipes? And what if I told you probably already have that ingredient and you've been throwing it out? Meet Aquafaba, the liquid that comes from a can of chickpeas that's taking plant-based cooking to the next level. Today we'll break down how Aquafaba works its magic as both an egg and oil substitute and how you can use it to transform your recipes. And stick around until the end because I'll even show you how to make it. This is not a video full of recipes. What this is a bunch of lessons so that you can take this amazing ingredient and use it as an oil and or egg substitute in the recipes that you've already got. But before we jump into those lessons, I'd like to give a quick hello to some of the people who've said hello to us in the comments down below. Kim from Oxford, Michigan, Carol from Snug, Australia, Laura from Central Coast of California, Stella Jr. from Farmington Hills, Michigan, Lydia from Colorado Springs, Billy from Tennessee, Lisa from Dunnville, Ontario, which is crazy close to where I grew up in Cayuga, Ontario, so shout out to Southwestern Ontario. Whoop whoop. Sarah in the Hudson Valley of New York. Celeste and Lawrence in Los Angeles. Aaron from London in the United Kingdom. Carol Ann from Sudbury, Ontario. Julie from Melbourne, Australia. Laura in the California Central Coast, specifically Arroyo Grande. If you'd like a shout out here on the channel, all you have to do is let us know in the comments down below who you are, where you're watching from, and let us know what recipe you are going to use Aquafaba in moving forward. And if you want to bump up on that shout out list, you can always join us over in the Mighty Network for that perk, along with all of these other ones, all for the price of a crappy cup of coffee a month. Okay, so now what is Aquafaba? Aquafaba is the starchy, protein-rich liquid left over from cooked or canned chickpeas. Its unique properties allow it to mimic eggs and oil in recipes, giving you fluffy, creamy, and perfectly bound dishes without any animal products or the added fat that comes with them. We did do a deep dive into Aquafaba in a previous video, but this one's gonna go a little bit deeper and answer some of those questions that you have had, like, can I use Aquafaba to replace eggs and oil in the same recipe? Yes, because it can leaven and emulsify at the same time, which makes it better than those two ingredients on their own. Right? Is that how that maths? It also does a lot of things you might not expect. Like, you can use it as an egg wash on baked goods to give it that little extra brown and crispy vibe you got going on for like pie crusts. And even in oil-dense baking recipes like focaccia, I have used it to replace the oil 1-to-1. We even have that recipe in our new cookbook. And we also have a recipe in here for how to make Aquafaba yourself. But like I said, I'll show you how to do that at the end of the video. And for those that are asking, do we still have hard copies of our cookbook left? We did do a couple extra in the order that we just put through, but it's gonna be first come, first serve. So if you want one of those, email me right here and I'll see if I can hook you up. Otherwise, the ebook is still available and is equally awesome. So let's talk about whipping. This is something that I think is what most people think about when they think about Aquafaba, because a lot of people have showed this off because it's really, really impressive to look at and it gives you a lot of wow factor. It's definitely one of the more visual representations of what it can do by making like a whipped cream or a meringue. And you can see me here using it to create this beautiful whipped cream that I put on top of a trifle. And really all you have to do is add just a little bit of cream of tartar to it, because what that does is help give it its body, helps make it nice and frothy as well. And then after that, you just need to add your sweetener of choice, 1 tablespoon at a time. I typically use maple syrup. I find like anywhere from 1/3 cup to 1/2 cup is probably enough, but you do you. And then when you're getting to the end of it, you just add in any extracts you want as well, like vanilla, mint, put in any food coloring you want. What's really, really awesome about Aquafaba as a whip too is you can't over whip it like you can with dairy whipped cream, where it will turn into butter eventually. And if you let it sit for a bit and it starts to fall flat, you just re-whip it and it's good to go again. Whipped Aquafaba is perfect for just using on top of a dessert. You can actually bake it and make meringues out of it. You could use it to make like a chocolate mousse by just whipping it with some melted chocolate. And you can also use it the way you would use egg whites in alcoholic drinks. I don't tend to do this, but I know a lot of people have said that they like to whip Aquafaba before using it in baking. I find it's just fine to use it like you would oil or eggs in the baking, but let me know in the comments down below if that's what you do, but also just experiment. I'm always going to tell you to just experiment whenever you ask me if Aquafaba can do anything or everything. I do believe it can do everything. Anyway, experiment. Play around with it yourself. It's so much fun to just mess around in the kitchen and just see what this thing can do for you. Now let's talk about how it works as a binder. If you've got like a cake recipe or a muffin recipe, you literally just swap it out 1 to 1. This is going to work to bind all the ingredients together as well as add some air and leaven it. And you can use it in non sweet and savory baking as well. This is the kind of thing I would use as an egg replacement if I'm making like a vegan meatloaf or veggie burgers. You can also use a flax egg for something like that. Traditionally, where I would use the Aquafaba is more in baked goods. Anything from cookies to brownies to muffins to cakes. And I've mentioned it before, but I'll just say it one more time. When you're replacing it for oil, it's 1 to 1, half a cup to half a cup. When you're using Aquafaba to replace an egg, if it's just an egg white you're replacing, it's 2 tablespoons of Aquafaba for 1 egg. If you're using it to replace the entire egg, it's 3 tablespoons. If you have 2 eggs in the recipe, obviously double it. You can do the math. You'll figure it out. You're a smart cookie. So now let's talk about how we use it purely as an emulsifier. Now this is where you're definitely using it just to replace oil. So recipes where you use it like that is any salad dressing that calls for oil, and let's be honest, tons of salad dressings call for oil. Vegan mayonnaise is another one. Dips like hummus or any other kind of dip you want to make, like using beans or roasted red peppers. So now let's talk about how we use it to leaven things like bread. I've already talked about how you can use it to replace oil in baking, but what I thought was particularly amazing was when I went to make a focaccia from one of the cookbook reviews we did recently, and it called for like a cup of oil. And in my brain, I just went, well, that's like a ridiculous amount of calories. So I just did an experiment with myself just to see if I could just replace the entire thing with Aquafaba, and it worked beautifully. I didn't do a side-by-side comparison because I don't want to and I didn't need to, but what I found most fascinating was doing it the way I did it reduced the calories of this recipe in half. And lastly, let's talk about how it can be used as a thickening agent. If you've ever seen someone make a soup recipe and at the end you see them drizzle in some olive oil, you can use it for that. You can use it to thicken gravies, stews, creamy desserts like a pudding. It adds a beautiful amount of body and creaminess without any of the eggs or oil. Seriously, moving forward, whenever you see a recipe that says oil, I just want you to tell your brain, I can use Aquafaba for that. Now, before I tell you how to make this wonderful magical thing perfectly every time, let me run you through a few tips and tricks for its success. Before you whip it, you're gonna wanna make sure it's chilled for best results. Don't forget, if you are whipping it, add a pinch or so of cream of tartar just to help give it some body and to stabilize it a little bit. If your Aquafaba isn't working for some reason, it's probably because it's not thick enough. All you need to do is just cook it down on a stove for a few minutes, just boil it down and then cool it again in the fridge. And then the reverse is true as well. If you cooked it down and made it too thin, just add some water to it. If you have too much of it that you're not going to use, put it in ice cube trays. It's almost a perfect amount to replace a single egg. But just make sure on your own, do it using tablespoons and see how many tablespoons fit into your ice cube trays. Then you have like a freezer full of ready to go Aquafaba whenever you need it. Some of you have asked us, how do we have so much Aquafaba all the time? The answer is we just plan ahead, and whenever we're meal planning and if I'm low on Aquafaba, I just make sure I pick something that we need to make chickpeas with. Worst case scenario, I make like a cookie dough recipe where it's like, I don't know, magic in my mouth. It's protein and chickpeas and chocolate and all that goodness. Oh. And then I get Aquafaba to use in other things. But I mean, chickpeas you can use for so many different things, falafels. So it's not that hard to have a decent amount of Aquafaba around most of the time. I find when I make a batch the way we make it, it makes about like a mason jar full, which is lots. And really, I'd probably only get through about half of that in a week anyway, and then you freeze the rest, and then you've got that for whenever you want it. So, plan ahead. A lot of people ask, how long does it last in the fridge? Generally speaking, I'd say it's good for at least a week. But here's the thing, just smell it. Smell it when you first make it, because it's got a bit of a, I don't know, I think it's a fairly neutral smell. But I'll tell you this, when it's gone bad, you will know, and you will not want to put it anywhere near anything that you are eating. So that's the real answer. Give it a sniff, and it'll tell you if it's good to go or not. A lot of people have asked, can you use liquids from other beans the way you use aquafaba? And the answer, as far as I know, is yes. The good thing about the chickpea juice or water or whatever you want to call it is that it's a pretty neutral flavor compared to something like a black bean juice. So that's the primary reason I think people use chickpeas. That said, if you are all really interested and want me to do a comparison test using the liquids from other beans, let me know, and maybe that's something I'll do on the channel here in the future. The most important thing that you can do is just experiment. If you've got a recipe that calls for eggs and or oil, just give it a try. You learn best by doing. For those of you that have been wonderfully patient and wondering how you make this perfectly every time, I'm going to splice in that section from our previous video on aquafaba to teach you how. If you've got some time in advance, soak 2 cups of chickpeas in just a bunch of water and let them sit ideally overnight or up to 8 hours. It's just going to reduce your cooking time. I will now give you stovetop and Instant Pot directions for how to make it. For the Instant Pot, if you soak your chickpeas in advance, drain out that soaking liquid, add them to your Instant Pot with another 6 cups of fresh water. Cook them for about 20 minutes and then let them naturally release, which should take another 30 minutes. Then you're gonna let them just sit inside there until they come to room temperature. You're then gonna transfer all of that into another container and then just leave it in the fridge, ideally for another couple of hours overnight if you have time to do so, and just let it all just marinate and gel together for maximum protein saturation. If you didn't soak them in advance, that's totally fine. Just give them a quick rinse and instead add 7.5 cups of fresh water to your Instant Pot. And now you're gonna cook it on manual for 46 minutes. And then the rest of the same instructions I already gave applies. For the stovetop, it's pretty much essential that you soak them in advance. Otherwise, it's just gonna take you forever to cook. Don't do that to yourself. Just like with the Instant Pot, you're gonna drain the original soaking liquid and then you're gonna add this to the stovetop with 8 cups of fresh water. Cover the pot with a lid and bring it to a boil. And just be careful because it can boil over quickly. You want to bring it down to a nice simmer. Skim off any foam that collects at the top and just discard that. After the chickpeas do come to a boil, bring them down to a simmer and then cook them for like 65 to 75 minutes. And then just like the Instant Pot, once it's cooked, turn the heat off, let it just sit and come to room temperature all together, and then you're gonna transfer that to another container, put it in the fridge, leave it for a couple hours or overnight. And then no matter which of these methods you've chosen, once they've cooled for a couple hours in the fridge, you're then gonna strain that liquid out and put the chickpeas aside and put the liquid into something like a mason jar. I like to write the date on it so that I know when that batch was made. This stuff's gonna last at least a week inside of your fridge, but you can also freeze it. Just make sure it is nice and cool before you do so. If it starts to smell a little bit extra funky or gets really, really cloudy, it's probably time to toss it. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive we've taken into aquafaba. If you want to have recipes other than your own to cook it with, our cookbook has tons of recipes where we use aquafaba instead of using eggs and oil, and you can get it at the QR code that is on the screen below. Again, if you want to get a physical copy like I just showed you, they're in limited supply. Email me right here and I will try to hook you up if we still have any available. Otherwise, hit that like button to let YouTube know to share this with other people. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and stick around because YouTube has this video all queued up for you. Who knows, maybe it's something you can use that big batch of avocado aquafaba that you have. It's worth a try.